So, welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, and I'm here to introduce Scott van Loo, who would be presenting to you all on Adjust Your Teaching by Knowing Your Student Brains at the 2024 CU Boulder Disability Symposium. I am a 5'3" female with brown eyes, black hair Latina, wearing a black shirt, gold butterfly hoop earrings, and red lipstick. The University of Colorado Boulder is hosting the Disability Symposium to acknowledge that more work must be done to improve inclusion of persons with disability on the Boulder campus. Efforts to improve inclusion must focus on students, staff, and faculty. The 2021 CU Boulder Campus Climate Survey results showed us that 44% of undergraduate students and 47% of graduate students reported experiencing instability in the prior 12 months, and this was released on April of 2022. For students with disability, these numbers climbed to 54% and 62%, respectively. The symposium is a springboard to continue campus-wide conversations and also community conversations as we invite members of our community to join the conversation of how to be more inclusive to all persons with disability. The symposium organizers would also like to take a moment to issue a land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous people in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it's located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado can never undo or rectify the devastation brought on the indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of indigenous CU Boulder staff, students, and faculty and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating indigenous knowledge in the classroom, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support to recruit, retain, graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful of all. Now, I would like to give a warm welcome to my friend and colleague, Scott van Loo. Welcome. Thank you so much, Scott, for being here. We are looking forward to your conversation. And I'm going to go ahead and start by inviting everyone to welcome Scott. Thank you, Scott, for being here.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, a pleasure to work with you and David, and I'm really encouraged by the work you're doing there, and that we even have the space to have the conversations. Again, my name is Scott van Loo. My pronouns are he and him. My ethnic background, I'm mixed heritage. I'm Lebanese and Lebanese American on my mother's side, and I'm Dutch American on my father's side. I'm about 5'11", and I'm wearing today a black coat and a white shirt. I have wide-rimmed black glasses on, and my skin is a little bit darker than most because of my Arabic heritage. Again, thank you for allowing me to be here. It's an absolute pleasure today, and I hope that you feel comfortable as participants in sharing some comments in the chat, and if you'd like to, also raising your hand and sharing verbally. I will have some breaks in the presentation for that very purpose, so I hope that you'll join me. I want to start off by saying I am not a neuroscientist. I am an educator, and I've been an educator my whole career. My specialty is in special education. I've taught pre-K through all the way through the collegiate graduate level. And I currently own a consulting business called Culturas Consulting Group, in which we do leadership and DEI, A and J work all over the country. And I'm, again, happy to be here representing not only myself, but the work of our company. So our first thing, if you'll engage with me, we are going to well, sorry, let me go back and introduce myself a little bit deeper. So on the screen, I have some pictures of my family and of myself. In the left-hand side is my partner, my wife Candice, and her two daughters, Eloise, who's a graduate of CU Boulder, and Camille, who's currently a senior at the University of Denver. On the upper right-hand side, again, my partner Candice and I, and my sons, Elias, who's in the middle, and Ari, who's in Portland, Oregon right now. And then in the middle picture, this is me playing some music with some preschool students at a bilingual dual language elementary school. And then also Candice and I in the lower right. So we are very, very happy and proud of our family. And also we have navigated some different spaces I didn't mention before, but I also identify as a person with a hidden disability, invisible disability, and several of our children have also navigated life with disabilities as well. So if you'll join me, we're going to just start by actually taking a moment to pause, just to take a breath. If you'd like to, you can close your eyes wherever you're at, or you can just lower your gaze. We'd like you just to put your feet flat on the floor, feel comfortable in your chair, and just take a moment to take at least 3 deep breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth. You can do this at your own pace. And just notice if you're holding any tension anywhere, or if you have any thoughts. And just invite yourself to be fully present here this morning. Okay, and thank you. Now I'm going to come back to this and tell you why there's a method to why we're doing this today. We'll explain it in just a little while in our presentation. So in the chat space, our first question is, are people with disabilities a minority group? Why or why not? So if you would join me, please, in the chat and have your answer in there. Or again, this is a space where you could unmute and share, or raise your hand and share. And Dr. Gonzalez, I might need some help just monitoring that. Thank you, Donna. I'm glad you like the pause. Hello, Eva. Great to see you again. Yes, larger than most people think. It's true. Yes, Jordan. Thank you.
So just want to reread the comments in the chat for folks who might have not had a chance to see them. So Eva says, absolutely, there are larger than most people think. Jordan says, yes, but I would say a large minority. Agreeing. And then we have a very large minority population. Thank you all for sharing. And we have some more of, yes, they are experiencing othering. So that's something you'll probably talk about, what othering means as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Erica. Yeah, I love the terminology. Othering comes from my experience, it comes from Dr. John A. Powell. He runs an organization at the University of California, Berkeley, called the Othering and Belonging Institute. And he talks about othering as being the opposite of belonging, where we create spaces and places where we point out how people are different, or we other them by not including or pointing out the differences. So this is a little bit of a loaded question, I suppose. But here's what we're going to go through. We're going to make the case for why this is so important to talk about. We're going to talk about psychological safety, and especially psychological safety within your classrooms. We're going to talk about a framework, and I spelled it this way on purpose because it's a frame that works when you think about working with students. And then finally, some final thoughts. And again, I just want to restate, I'm not a neuroscientist. There are days where I wish I was. I'm fascinated by it. and I've applied it to my teaching career with great success. So I'm hoping you'll join me in doing the same. And I hope we can have the space to co-create some knowledge together. So when we talk about making the case, I usually start out my presentations this way because I want to make sure people understand that this is a minoritized population. When we say minoritized, there's several implications to that. So when we think about what a minority is by definition, like we can go all the way back to the 40s and 50s and even earlier, where we started seeing social scientists and psychologists and et cetera, starting to identify as people who were experiencing discrimination collectively. In the 50s, this is Wagley and Harris started five kind of components or characteristics: unequal treatment, distinguishing physical, cultural traits, involuntary membership, awareness of subordination, and a high rate of in-group marriage. Now, the last one has been taken out in the more modern kinds of looks at what a minority is. And then others have added to this definition in modern times, including having a civil rights movement and some of the following, or all of the following: subjected to mass atrocities, shared identities, historical circumstances, and federal protections. So if you think about the check boxes, then yes, people with disabilities fit all of that, including the civil rights movement. In fact, if you're familiar with the Capitol crawl that happened in the 80s that led to the Americans with Disabilities Act, a lot of the planning and a lot of people who participated in that are from the Denver and Colorado and Boulder area. So let's continue to take a look. We, in fact, are the largest minoritized population in the world and in the US. The infographic on the left shows, this is from the Americans with Disabilities Act website, that 27% of adults in the United States have some type of disability, with adults being defined as those that are 18 or older. And in Colorado, we have 1,063,940 adults who have a disability, and this is equal to 24%. And again, I do want to caution with statistics, whether it's statistics on disability or statistics on race and ethnicity. We always miss a lot of people because of reporting purposes, et cetera. These are our best attempts. And I do want to say on a positive note that the census is starting to think about ways in which they could ask questions to get to more of these kinds of statistics. Here's what your information looks like at CU. I grabbed this from your report from 2023. And on the left, it has a Hispanic Latino population. This is the largest subgroup of underrepresented groups or minoritized groups at 13%. And then take a look at disabilities at 12.10. This is only your Boulder campus out of 39,191 students from 2023. And then you have Asian, Black, African American at 2%. American Indian and Alaska Native and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander do have numbers at the university, but they're less than 1%. I believe Native Hawaiian was like 34, 35 students, and American Indian, Alaska Native, as identified, was somewhere around 78 or 80. So one last thing on this slide before we move on and talking about making the case. So this 12.1% are students who have registered with your Office of Disability Services, but it doesn't include all of those that have not. So if we apply those statistics that we talked about in Colorado or nationally, where we're somewhere between 22 to 27%, then by far, people and students with disabilities on your campus is the largest majority. And what we've been playing around with is this concept of a disability serving institution. So if that were front and center on everyone's mind, how would we do things differently? And that's the whole purpose of this presentation and others that I've been involved in. So let's talk a little bit about psychological safety. This quote comes from Herbert Cole, who wrote a little tiny book called I Won't Learn From You. And this says, if you want to find a student's weakness, failures, personal problems, or inadequacies, you'll discover them. If you look at a student through the filter of his or her environment or economic status, or make judgments through the filters of your own cultural, gender, and racial biases, you'll find the characteristics you expect. And I'm sorry to say, far too often I've seen firsthand with my most recent work at the University of Denver as the director of the Learning Effectiveness Program, I've seen professors who all over the map. I'm not kidding you. I had a professor a professor of several of our students who said, this providing these kinds of things just isn't the real world. So this person was refusing to give even their accommodations in class. And we see others who maybe just through not knowing are not providing all the accommodations and maybe just needing some support or some help in doing that. So we're still in a space where we're not even getting 100% compliance from that level, from a compliance level. So I wanted to put this slide in too, because especially after the COVID pandemic and the other identity pandemics that happened in 2020 and on, anxiety disorders are now the most common mental health concern in the United States and on our college campuses. And we don't have accurate information as to how many students are experiencing anxiety. However, when I was at the University of Denver, we did a study involving 380 students, half of whom were registered with the Office of Disabilities and the other half were not. And we used a researcher who had come from the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, but is a professor now at DU and runs an anxiety lab. And she was blown away by this combined research project in which 100% of our students surveyed indicated some level of anxiety, and about a third of them indicated a level of anxiety that was concerning enough that she said if they were standing in front of her, she would have walked them over to the health center right away to seek treatment. Okay, so anxiety is one of our biggest pieces and one of those that we call an invisible disability on campuses. So we need to just have these things in our mind. This is what I'm saying. So when there isn't a culture of safety in a classroom, okay, and maybe some of you have been in this space. I know I have. When I'm a student or I'm a learner, I don't want to appear negative, so I won't question the status quo. So maybe there's a conversation that's happening and the professor is saying, does anybody have any comments? And 2 or 3 people are raising their hand. It's all kind of going one way, but I have a different opinion. Well, I don't want to appear negative. I don't want to challenge the professor, so I'm just not going to say anything, right? I don't want to seem intrusive, so I don't want to offer my ideas. This can also be very cultural, where if we just invite, does anybody have anything to say? Well, culturally, in many, many cultures, we don't question the professor, right? Because they're out of respect and they're the person that has the information. The upper right says, I don't want to look ignorant, so I won't ask any questions. It's anxiety again coming up. I'm so fearful that if I publicly ask this, I don't want to be ridiculed or I want to be looked at funny, etc. And then at the bottom right, I don't want to look incompetent, so I won't display any vulnerability or admit any mistakes. And sometimes this is, not sometimes, oftentimes, and maybe all the time, it's to the detriment of the student, right? Because maybe the student is not asking for clarification on assignment, afraid to ask for help, afraid to ask questions in class. So then there's all kinds of other behaviors that happen. So let's talk about the positive end of this. What is psychological safety in the classroom? It's a shared belief held by members of a team or a classroom that it's okay to take risks, to express ideas and concerns, to speak up with questions, and to admit mistakes, all without fear of negative consequences. And this comes from Amy Edmondson, Dr. Amy Edmondson from Harvard, who in the 90s, I believe, helped to coin the term team psychological safety. And subsequently, there's been a lot of research on it. I'm going to see if this video will play, but this is Lady Eidos, and she is, I don't know if she still is, but was the chief diversity officer at the Berkeley lab, and they partnered with Google and they did this project on psychological safety.
Psychological safety was coined in 1999 by an organizational behavioral scientist named Amy Edmondson, and she described it as feeling safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So the value of psychological safety is making sure that we are creating an environment where people feel comfortable contributing and bringing their ideas forward. If we have that environment where people feel comfortable, then we have this environment of support for better innovation. What they found at Google in Project Aristotle is that the teams with the most psychological safety were rated as effective twice as much by their leaders. They also brought in more revenue, they had more innovation, and also their employees actually stayed longer. They were engaged and the retention was higher. So there's lots of benefits to having a high-performing team with psychological safety, and you can tell in the rapport and the dynamics of the group. One example that I've seen is that there's a project that people are working on, and then there's one person that holds a critical piece of information that can either lead the project to success or failure. And because that person doesn't feel safe to contribute, that idea, if you don't have psychological safety, gets lost. And so it's really important to draw out the ideas from people, to draw out their contributions, to make sure that you have full information for better decision making. So I can speak from experience. When I'm in a psychologically safe team, I feel empowered to ask questions. I feel empowered to take risks. And I think that's the kind of creativity that I really like in being part of a team environment. I feel fully seen and I feel fully valued for what I bring to the table.
Right. Great. So let's talk about this just really quickly. Let's talk about this a little more. All right. So when we foster psychological safety in the classroom, there's a reason why it feels good. Okay. As was said on the video, we feel seen. We feel like we can contribute. We feel like we can be our full, authentic selves. We feel like we can disclose disabilities if those are on the table. And we feel like we have people that kind of get us and will work with us in all of our contexts and identities, as well as us providing that and offering that to others. So here's some ways in which we can foster psychological safety. Really check our inclusive language and model inclusive practices, including looking at the course content, our teaching methods. This is such a big one. Okay, there are so many ways in which we can help foster this creation of psychological safety by offering ways, creative ways in which students can work together, in which they can have equal time to talk and share between each other in safe spaces first, maybe one-on-one, what we call a dyad or a time dyad, where we have actual rules around group work, right? My favorite one is everyone speaks once before someone speaks twice, or at least has the opportunity to, when you're in a group of 3 or 4. That we have class norms, and even better, that students have contributed to those class norms, and that we're intentionally inclusive of differences in gender, race, sexual orientation, disability status, other dimensions of identity. And again, kind of pointing back to the content, that we're intentionally inclusive within the content. That if it's not evident right now, that you go look for it, that you have a wide variety of content from a wide variety of individuals that you can center their voices. Consider how issues of identity, power, and privilege surface in your content and in the classroom environment. And this includes you, right? So immediately when students enter a room, there's a power differential just because of your title, just because of the nature of how we've set up the class. So you need to not only understand that, but understand that it's causing anxiety for many students just from walking in the door, period. You could be the nicest, greatest person on the face of the earth, but that power differential is still there, and you need to understand it. Read up on it if you'd like to learn more about that, and read up on what you can do. The second box says, seek to eliminate unnecessary distance between yourself and your students. Aha, this is where the vulnerability comes in. If you're asking them to share, are you willing to share also? Are you willing to share about your own experiences? Are you willing to share just as deeply or model that sharing for them? Let them see you as human. Maybe go outside a couple times outside the classroom, do some other kinds of fun learning, et cetera, et cetera. Let them get to know you. Number 3, the third box says publicly acknowledge students' contributions to the classroom discourse. Now, this isn't placating. This isn't in any way insincere, but there's a way to do this in the front of the room where you're saying, oh, that's a great contribution, even if it's way off. Thank you for contributing that thought. Does anybody else have any other thoughts? Does anybody have any thoughts that might be on the other side of this argument, right? So you're weaving it in constantly, but you're not shutting it down or you're not shaming from the front of the room. And then finally, use multiple methods to connect students and help them process information. I call these structures, that when you have a lot of different process structures or way to structure information. Okay, all of these things lead to psychological safety. Now, do you have any comments? What have you done maybe in your classroom to build psychological safety? When have you experienced it yourself to some degree of success? What are your thoughts on this component, psychological safety? And we'll take those in the chat, and then we'll move into the brain here.
As you
And or
sharing.
again, this is another space where you can unmute or raise your hand if you'd like to share in that way as well.
Yes, and Scott, as you were sharing, I couldn't help but to think English is my second language. And I remember in high school, my teachers used to say that I used to slow my class down, so they used to put me in the side because on the side because I'm slowing everyone down, and that can create this fear going into college that you are going to slow everyone down. So you should be put in a corner, or you shouldn't, and these we talk about culture, but we also talk about practices that can be a negative that students are bringing into college that they have experienced before. And so we have to recognize that it could take some time. And so thank you for sharing all of that. We have a comment in the chat as well. And so David, Brad says, one professor spent the first day of class discussing how everyone would interact in appropriate ways. It would always focus on inclusion and creating space for people to participate.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And Eva above said, Eva above said this overlaps with best practices in STEM. It overlaps in best practices with culturally responsive teaching. It overlaps in many, many ways. Yes. And what Braz is sharing is what we call predictable environment, right? On day one, you're setting up that this is what is going to happen in this space, and this is how it's going to happen. This is how we're going to interact. When you take care of all that immediately, then you reduce the level of stress, you reduce the level of anxiety, you increase the level of psychological safety by making a predictable environment. So let's talk a little bit about a frame that works. And this is where we get into the brain just a little bit. Okay, again, I'm not a brain scientist, but this is brain science. And I've used it in terms of how to frame walking into a classroom and thinking about students. So this is what we call the threat reward system of the brain. It's also referred to as the organizing principle of the brain, in which many, many people, including myself, I would be in this camp, but many researchers saying every single moment of the day, the brain is either scanning for threat or reward, and everything is reduced to those two things, period. Either it's a threat, every single moment of your life is either a threat or a reward, and your brain is acting appropriately. Now, at the top of this infographic, it says our brain does not know the difference. It's only concerned with one thing: is it a threat? So what this is referring to is your brain does not know the difference if this happened 10 years ago or if it's happening right now in the moment. So going back all the way back to that quote from Herbert Cole, the book I Won't Learn From You, what he's saying is oftentimes people, like as a instructor or professor, when I walk into that classroom, just the way I look, just the outward identities that I have may cause someone to remember an experience that was a negative experience, or just the topic. If you have to retake a collegiate mathematics course and you had some really terrible experience in math in middle school and high school, then guess what? Your brain is already saying threat, 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 even though, again, you might be the most fabulous teacher in the universe. And I hope you are. But just know that for some students, the topic or the way you look or the fact that I'm a male and I'm walking into, it could be any number of things. So take a look here at the infographic. The mind is constantly replaying these thoughts, stories, memories, predictions, etc. And we also are taking in information from our 5 senses. And then the brain immediately and subconsciously, most often, is determining, is this a threat? Now, some scientists are saying the brain is capable of taking in 11 million pieces of information per second. 11 million pieces of information per second. However, it processes only around 30 to 40 of those pieces of information. Okay, so this is happening lightning fast, and it's happening on a subconscious or preconscious level. So is it a threat? Yes, then it's going to go to your sympathetic nervous system. That's threat or response, that fight, flight, or freeze. You're going to get these pumps of cortisol and adrenaline into the body, which are the stress hormones and also the anxiety hormones. Okay, 1 pump of cortisol in the brain takes 7 hours to then decline and fully get rid of. So this is chemistry that's happening in your body along with these responses. If it's not a threat, then your parasympathetic nervous system is activated and you feel at ease and you have rest and you're better able to digest. The chemicals that are released are opiates and oxytocin, and you're in a state of calm. So let's talk a little bit about our nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system. This is part of the fight, flight, freeze, or flock system, the 4 F's. This is what we call the threat or not like me, when the brain is thinking not like me. Someone mentioned earlier the othering and belonging, right? The brain is immediately saying not like me, so therefore they're the other. This is like me, therefore they're safe. This is my people, etc. Or what we call the away from response, because when activated, we want to move away from the stimulus or that threat, no matter what it is. It could be a person. Back in the day, it could be a saber-toothed tiger, or today it could be a really giant equation on the board that's overwhelming, right? Or it could be a topic, or the fact that I have to write a 10-page paper and I put it off, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things activate adrenaline and cortisol. The brain scans for threat 5 times more than reward. Take that one in. The brain scans for threat 5 times more than reward automatically. And then again, these reactions happen at the unconscious level, and it puts us into this survival mode. Okay, again, if you have or would like, keep the comments coming in the chat or questions. This is one of what I feel like is one of the most important charts I've ever seen. I use this quite often. This comes from Dr. Bruce Perry. Dr. Bruce Perry, who's author, national speaker, neuroscientist, runs a center, etc. Dr. Bruce Perry. So this is a chart of what happens when we're in these different states, mental states. So across the top, we have levels, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The second layer is what we call our mental state, or these could be our emotions. Again, number 1 is calm. Number 2 is alert. Number 3 is anxious. Number 4 is afraid. And number 5 is terror. What the scientists have done is been able to look at what we call our functional IQ. This is our ability to process information and use our brain in its capacity or capacities based on these levels of emotion or states that we are in the brain. Okay. Elizabeth, who's charged this again, this is Dr. Bruce Perry, P-E-R-R-Y, and several books. I think he's one of those endorsed by Oprah, prolific writer. He's on YouTube, and there's tons of stuff you can find on him, Dr. Bruce Perry. Okay, and then take a look at what happens with our brain functioning. Okay, this is our functional IQ, meaning what are we able to what's our capacity in the moment? Look at column 3 when we're anxious, or column 4 when we're afraid. Okay, if we're anxious, we're only using 80 to 90% of our functional capacity of our brain. If any of you, like me, have been in afraid or terror in an academic setting, look at what happens. Have you ever had that experience where you just kind of blacked out for a minute? I did in my college business statistics class at the final. The professor put the final on the table and I blacked out. I mean, the page went blank and I sat there for about 20 minutes before I realized I can't do it. So I turned it in and I talked to the professor and I ended up having to retake the course and I approached it in a completely different way. But I've been in this space as a learner. And I've also been in this space on the left-hand side where I've been alert. Now, this is where we want to be. The optimal space is not actually too calm, okay? Because then you're like, oh, you're too laid back. You want to be alert, about 90 to 100% of your brain. And then look at where the functional areas are. This is the fourth column here on the chart, primary brain areas. And the neurocortex or the cortex. This is where learning occurs. This is our prefrontal cortex, our cortical areas of the brain. Look at the third column under anxious. If we're in that state, then we're using our limbic system, which is all of our fight, flight, freeze. It's the emotional center. Oftentimes we say the amygdala, which is one of the control centers of the brain for this particular system, hijacks the brain from the third column over to the right. That our amygdala hijacks the brain. It hijacks our ability to think. So literally, if we're in this state of anxiety or we're afraid, we cannot access the cortical areas of our brain, period. And then the final column there at the bottom talks about our sense of time. Okay? And again, maybe you've experienced this, where the more stressed out or the more afraid we get into the right side, our sense of time gets more and more minute. We're not able to think in extended time or into the future or planning, etc. Okay, thank you for the comments and keep those coming. Questions, anything like that. So let's talk about the other side, our parasympathetic nervous system. Its functions are controlled by the vagus nerve. This isn't Las Vegas, but this is the Vegas spelled a little bit differently. But still, it's a party and it's a lot of fun when we learn how to use it to our advantage. Okay, we can use it to change the F4, or what we call fight, flight, freeze, flock. Try to say that fast several times. The F4 response, and it slows us down. You can lower your heart rate, your blood pressure. You can alter the chemical stress response. The vagus nerve actions can be activated through the very first thing we did today, breathing, visualization, contemplative practices, or contemplative practices. And it immediately sends a different signal to the brain that it's a reward activation. Now, we can also, as people in the front of the room or in front of students, this reward activation can be also activated through positive nonverbal cues. This includes helping someone as students. Okay, so if you're doing, again, this comes back to those, how are you structuring your class? If you have students helping each other to learn the content, or helping each other as teachers, or helping someone else in a meaningful way, learning something new can oftentimes be a reward piece if it's in the right context. Giving positive feedback. And another researcher out of Harvard talked about something as simple as just smiling and showing positive regard from your nonverbal self in the front of the room. Did you ever think that just taking a moment to smile at your students would help them, their parasympathetic nervous system? Well, it does, which helps them ultimately to be better learners. So this is Dr. Bruce Perry, who I mentioned earlier. He's also known for this model called the 3 R's: regulate, relate, and reason. And it follows the brain science. So when we take time to regulate, that's what we did again together. We took a minute, maybe a minute and a half. We did some breathing. What the science says is if we take at least a minimum of 3 deep breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth, and we do that regularly throughout the day in a focused and intentional way, that we can alter that chemical response of fight, flight, freeze, or flock. Okay. And it also helps us as professors not to assume that everybody's ready to learn the minute they walk in the door or the minute they're on the Zoom. So there's a bunch of different ways we can do regulation exercises. Some are what we call reflective exercises, some are active, but it's working with the brain. The active ones are more cross-medial, etc. We don't have time to go over all those today, but I'm happy to connect with you later or continue to look them up, ways in which you can activate the brain through cross-medial exercises. They're fun, they're fast, and they help just get you in the room. The second is relate. So when we take time, our brains are wired from an evolutionary and historical perspective to connect. We have a desire to connect. Even though a lot of students will say maybe that's not their strength, but we actually have a desire to be seen, to connect to others, and to feel that belonging, which is the opposite of the othering, as we talked about earlier. And then finally, the reason. So what Dr. Perry says is if we want to get here, reason is our content. If we want to get to our content, take some time to do these two things, to regulate and to relate very quickly, very simply. Okay. And again, as David Braz shared, if we do that up front, if we say this is how we're going to operate, then not only does it become just a part of the routine, but I've majority of the instances where I've used this in classrooms, it becomes something that students look forward to. So let's again talk about why this is so important. Take a look again, when we are calm or alert in that chart on the left, then we are in our cortical areas. This is our prefrontal cortex. It's top-down regulation. We have flow of thought, flow of action, flow of emotion. They're all working together, and they're all centered in the cortical areas of the brain, which is where we want to be for optimal learning. Okay. If we're stressed, if we're anxious, if we're afraid, or we've had something happen, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this too, where you've had a life experience happen, but yet you have to go to class, right? Well, you're not here, you're here. So this begs a question, what can we do to help students to learn how to regulate? And also what can we do that we have these regular pieces in where we can take some time to regulate as a class, and that there's a safe space to do that, a psychologically safe space. If we don't have that, if students are coming in stressed, if they're coming in anxious, if they're coming in all these other states, then here's the amygdala hijack. Everything, all the signals are coming from the amygdala, and it's reflexive, it's automatic, nervous, it's sending out those chemicals that are keeping us tense and tight, etc., not ready to learn. Here's one other way to look at it, what Dr. Perry calls state-dependent brain functioning. You can see the different parts of the brain on the left, regulate, relate, and reason. And interestingly, this is the same order that the brain develops in. So our regulation part of our brain, the amygdala, the brainstem, et cetera, is the first to develop. Then we get into the limbic system, the relation, that's all the emotions. And then finally, the neural cortex, or the cortical areas, are the last to develop. Now, in the chat, if you know this answer, please put it in there. What's the average age in which the brain finally fully develops? And this is what we're talking about is the prefrontal cortex and the cortical areas. Finally fully develops. What age is that? Or you can unmute too. I see a couple of responses. Yes, good job. 25 or older, 27, 28, you're all correct. The average is around 25, and then for males and females, but the male brain takes a little longer. In some research articles, they project even into the early 30s. Okay. Now, here's the fun fact. Everything that we're asking students to do, to be organized, to show up on time, to regulate their emotions, to comprehend and synthesize information. All of that occurs in the cortical, and more occurs in the cortical areas of the brain, which are the last to develop. So when we're asking a 20-year-old or a 19-year-old to do all these things, and that person has a disability, then they need some tools. We need to do some scaffolding. We need to do some assistance. If our collective goal is to help students be successful in our classes, then we need to help provide some of these tools and these things. For some students, they've already got it, and for many, they don't. They need help. So when you say, oh, in week 8, you're going to have a 10-page paper due, and it's week 1, there's a reason why many of the students in the class will put that off until week 7.5. Okay. And it has to do with brain development, brain functioning, and that their brains aren't fully developed, and especially the males. So what can we do? These are key questions. What can we do to work with this to help our students, especially our students with disabilities, but all students will benefit from our knowledge of using the brain to our advantage, right? When we're teaching in front of the room. So here's this question for you. How can you use this information in your classroom or your work with students and or for your own growth? So once again, please put in the chat, or you may unmute and share. I'd love to hear from you. And that was a super quick overview of just some basic parts of brain functioning, organizing principle of the brain, the threat and reward system of the brain, how to create psychological safety. All of this, these are just kind of these outliers on how we can create, in general, a classroom that's more conducive for learning for all students, but especially for those that are have invisible disabilities, etc. Okay. So how about you? How can you use this information? Maybe there's a topic you want to learn a little more about. Please, if you're willing, put it into the chat space. Yeah, thank you. Eva says, remembering that last bit, that the brains aren't fully developed. I mean, just that simple piece. When we start stacking on all these things and we don't know why they forgot the assignment or this is happening, it's because their brains aren't fully developed. That's a great place to start. Donna Mahia says, strategies I value, offering release valve. Yes. Fumble forward framework. You'll have to say a little more about that one. Looking for each student's zone of genius. I love it. Bringing vulnerability and laughter. Wow. I want to be in that class. Donna. Rashana, is it Bahave? Structure in the classroom. Yes. Providing structure, providing timely feedback, allowing revising processes. I love that. Where you give feedback and then you allow them a second chance or a third chance to revive. Because again, it's focusing on what's the most important thing. Is it getting it right the first time, or is it the learning process that comes from that feedback? Yeah, and enjoy learning from students. That's right. It's we can learn a lot when we don't have to be the sage on the stage, right? When we can create a space that's dynamic, that's interactive, where we emphasize a collective consciousness or a collective addition to co-creation of knowledge, right? That we have, of course, we have our backgrounds, we have our expertises, but our students do too. And if we can enter that space, it's very profound and amazing. Jordan says, understanding how individuals like to be recognized for their work, right? Some like to be praised or given feedback, others don't. I love that, because now, Jordan, you're talking about getting to know your students on a deeper level, and creating this environment that's going to be fantastic. Do they work well alone or with others? Exactly. And Jordan, that might be, maybe there's a survey at the beginning, or it might be a one-on-one if you have that opportunity with students to get to how they work best. Yeah, that's right. Our system is right. Yeah, Eva is talking about the whole system maybe needs to be changed, or we have, I think especially around COVID, after COVID, Taking a gap year has become more popular, and there's a reason for that, right? There's a reason for that. Okay, very good. So I want to leave you, we're almost at time here. I want to leave you just with a couple other kind of big thoughts. So our final thoughts as we're zooming through all this information. This is a fact. This is science. No two brains are the same. They're like fingerprints, okay? And so again, if we just hold some of these basic principles, number one, our students' brains aren't fully formed yet. Number two, no two brains are the same. So can we alter our teaching so we have multiple pathways to get to whatever our outcome is for our class? Can we lean into this a little bit? That everybody has a different way to process and think and function. And what I call that, and we call that, is neurodiversity. Now, I recognize some students, I haven't experienced this yet, where a student will self-identify as neurodivergent. I like to think of neurodiversity as an inclusive term, and therefore I use it as that without the other fragmentation of the word neurotypical or neuro-challenged or neuroatypical or all these things. I just say neurodiverse. If we embrace that word, then we all have access to it. It recognizes that no two brains are the same. We all think and process differently, etc. Here's a simple flow chart. Do you have students? Yes or no? If you do, then you need to use UDL and universal supports. Okay. We didn't have enough time to go into UDL, but sorry, there's cast.org, C-A-S-T, has a pretty decent higher education training. I think their next one starts in February of 2025. I think it's an 8-week thing, something like that. It's relatively reasonable. That's one resource. There's others out there. If you don't know what Universal Design for Learning is, then I really recommend you get some education around that. You can self-pace. You can learn that. Again, thank you, Eva, for the link in the chat. And then when we talk about universal supports, it's some of those things that you have already shared in the chat space. So let me see, I'm going back here. Yeah, like all of you have shared. Donna shared about some things around structures, and Jordan and Rashana. So when you think about these universal supports, it's just the way that you're holding your class to create that psychological safety, that there are multiple opportunities to share your knowledge verbally, non-verbally, in writing, etc. And that students know without a doubt that you're accessible, that you're available, that you're able to have one-on-one with them. Yeah, okay. So please learn about UDL and teach your colleagues about UDL. And then finally, this is a really important concept for us. There is no diversity, equity, inclusion without disability. We have to change the acronym. We need to make sure it's DEIA or that we have the accessibility, that we have disability, that we're included at the table, that we're included in the conversations, and that when we're lifting up and lifting out these conversations, that disability has a prominent seat at the table. Because again, back to the very first thing we talked about, we are the largest minoritized population. So if you're seeing that these conversations are not happening in conjunction with DEI, then please be that advocate. Okay. There's another comment here. Great. All right. So thank you so much. Again, my information is here. If you would like to have a sidebar conversation or contact me for anything, please do so. My phone number is there. My Gmail is there from the consulting group, Culturas Consulting. Happy to have continued conversation or help you with any information, getting you other resources. And then this is the post form. If you would please get your camera out and get this this code here so that you can get this post form. Okay. And thank you so much. I think I talked really fast and zoomed through this, but I really appreciate your attendance here and your attention. And I hope we can continue having these conversations. Thank you.
Hey, Scott, if you have a moment, I just wanted to say something real quick. When you mentioned that our University of Denver professor who didn't accept the idea of acknowledging that students might need different support, and he said, well, that's just not the real world.
Yeah.
And my takeaway from that is we need to make that the real world.
Correct.
Like, just like I was at the Social Justice Symposium last week, and it was the same thing.
Yeah.
Oh, the system's broken. No, it's the wrong system, right? And that whole idea of changing the acronym and adding disability into DEI, however it happens, I think it's really something that I think is a great idea, and we can just push that forward all the time, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So there were several kind of mitigating circumstances to that. One, this particular professor was a foreign national. I think they were from Brazil originally, and then had been living here in the U.S. and working in the U.S. So their kind of context in Brazil, these kinds of things don't happen, right, at the college level. So there needed to be some relationships built. When we talk about changing an individual or changing systems, I really come from that relational approach. So what ended up happening, we needed to, and we had a system though for this with the learning effectiveness program, where we could accompany that student into a meeting with the professor and help mediate that conversation, keeping the student's voice centered, but also being there as a support to say, well, actually, you do need to provide these, and here's the law behind it, and it's not optional. That it's a compliance piece. And so I know that most like offices of disability services, many don't have the capacity to do that kind of support. So we have to keep thinking systemically, how big is this problem? What do we need? Where do we need to help students have these kinds of conversations? Because that's a lot, again, to put on them. If you have a disability and you've already spoken up and saying, these are my accommodations I need in your class, and you get that kind of pushback, we have to have, that's an appropriate time and place for someone to be able to come in and say, well, no, actually you do need to, and if you don't, there could be a repercussion of some sort, right? So getting the deans involved and then I don't know what that advocacy could look like on campus at CU, but I think it's needed.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And I appreciate that context, but it's not like, you know, I haven't heard, you know, even in like, so being in engineering now, oh, that's just not, you know, you're going to have to fit into this mold. So why should we change the mold for you now? You know, maybe the mold needs some changing, you know?
Yes.
But anyway, I appreciate you so much. Thanks again. And hi, Patricia. Nice to see you. And I'll run off and let you guys do your thing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Scott, for being here. All the love that's coming in the chat. Just want to continue to thank you for your knowledge, for sharing the space, and for reminding us how to be more inclusive in our practices, but also thinking of ourselves and others as we engage with one another. So thank you so much.